Welcome to the Process Podcast.
From new agent to broker owner.
My name is Travis McClure. This is my co-host, Preston Guyton. Welcome to the Process Podcast. This is Travis McClure, my co-host, Preston Guyton. Preston, how you doing today, sir?
Good, man. Good. Back from Tahoe.
Yeah, I actually feel a little bit rusty making a podcast today. We haven't made one in 2 weeks because of our Tahoe trip.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I was actually driving here today. I was almost even a little bit nervous.
Getting butterflies?
Yeah, almost it's like the first day all over again. But great trip to Lake Tahoe. That was your first time out there, right?
Yeah, first time. Josh and Nick went last year, and I wasn't able to go, but yeah, it was my first time. Brought along my wife, which was nice to stay there a couple extra days, and just an amazing place. You know, I've never been, and it was just like we hiked the last day, just her and I, and we went. I think we hiked 6 miles, about 1,250 feet of elevation gain. So from you're already 6,500 feet.
Yeah,
above sea level, so we're up at about 8,000 feet. But looking down at the lake, it was amazing.
Yeah, I think about in the Myrtle Beach area, and don't quote me on this, but I think like the highest place in Myrtle Beach, the coastal South Carolina, we're about 100 feet above sea level, right? Like the tallest place you could be in Myrtle Beach. I had to think about there just before you start hiking, you're at 6,000 plus feet.
Yeah, it was neat. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think I run that 100 feet of elevation gain
Yeah.
when I run in Myrtle Beach, because it seems like it's around 82nd Avenue is when it's like the highest part.
Yeah, I absolutely love it too. So yeah, we went out there as a leadership team, 5 of us, plus we all brought our wives. It was a great trip. I said to my wife on the way home, it was our first time to Lake Tahoe, and it definitely will not be our last. I absolutely love the area. To me, that's hopefully an opportunity to go back to that Mastermind, but also a future vacation of some sort as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely. He's already got the dates for next year. He sent it out. I think it's September 18th and 19th. So my wife, I was trying to go ahead and book a room at the hotel, but it only books like 11 months or 12 months out.
Oh, wow.
So that was through American Express Travel, but I'm sure you could book it straight through the hotel.
Speaking of that, so the way the event was laid out was kind of cool. It was a mastermind event, but essentially you had a lot of leaders, Preston being one of those leaders, come up during the course of 2 days and basically open up the playbook of their business and a lot of times their lives and talk about what makes them operate, what makes them successful. And Preston, you had the honor to be one of those speakers. And I'm not saying this because I'm your friend and I'm your employee, but you did outstanding. Like you were just so vulnerable, told your story as to how and why you got here. How'd you feel after that? I call it a little TED talk that you did.
Oh yeah, I was relieved. I think we all, when we think about speaking, especially in the CEO of EXP was in the room. You're talking about broker owners, leaders that do over $1 billion a year in sales. So I don't even know what the collective number was in that room, probably 40 billion or more a year.
Yeah.
It was, so the anxiety that you get, I think the anxiety of getting on stage and doing that is 100 times worse than actually doing it. You know what I mean? Like you get up there, and I was nervous really for the first probably minute or two, but once you look out and realize it just kind of went away,
Right.
So, and I was, what I was talking about, I think is probably one of the most difficult things to get up on stage and talk about. So, I could have gone up there and easily talked about leads and recruiting and everything else, and it'd been a much easier talk for me, but it was, I look forward to next time. It was, once you do it once, you're like, oh, wow, it wasn't near as bad as I thought it would be.
Yeah, it was great. And I think you're right. I think, you could have got up there, stayed in your comfort zone, talked about easy home search, the things that you were, from a business standpoint, had the goal of talking about, but you opening up, being vulnerable, is a really hard thing to do, but it captivated the audience, myself included. There was things, in your talk that I didn't know about you. You know what I mean? And, just to be in that room associated with you, it gave me a greater appreciation for not only where you are as a leader, but what you had to go through to get there. And I think that's the important part about approaching a talk like that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was, I could easily got up there and talked about leads, but there's, it was like people working, right? So people were working the cameras. Two of them came up to me and they were like, "Wow, that's, I didn't expect to hear something like that at a real estate conference."
Mhm.
So yeah, it was really good, and obviously when you go share something like that, and then there's the fear of sharing that, but then
Yeah.
when you get the people that come after and like, wow, that would really meant a lot to me, and had people kind of explain to me they went through similar challenges, and it was just good to hear somebody else share that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the things that we are, we feel vulnerable about, right? We don't want to share about ourselves. I went through this experience. I've never done anything like you've gone. Just like you did, like go up on story and go up on stage and tell your story. But even to my spouse, when I, first met Kim, even to open up with her and tell her, some of the things you don't think are attractive about yourself, right? In terms of who you are as a person, to go up and open up like that is a really hard thing to do. But like that whole room gained a ton of respect for you because you did that. And I think about my relationship with my wife. She gained a ton of respect for me because I did that.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. You know what I mean? And as the audience listening to this, that to me was probably one of the biggest takeaways I had from that whole conference was that,
Yeah,
you
for
know.
sure.
Um Talk about Preston. You and I had this conversation. Lots of great best practices shared at that conference. Like you said, there's companies up there doing billions of dollars worth
Yeah.
of business. Lots of great best practices. I mean, I took almost a whole notebook full of notes. Talk about your approach when you come back. It can almost be overwhelming, right? Like the drinking from a fire
Oh
hose
yeah.
approach of
It's
things you want to implement.
Yeah, especially the first one. So that was probably I think that's my 8th or ninth Cheplak event. So I
Mhm.
didn't really take a whole lot of notes. A lot of it I've heard. I mean, not heard before, but I've heard a lot of the speakers speak, and I follow a lot of them, so I know a lot of what they're doing. But for me, there's always one or two or three things that I'll take away and will implement. All the events we've been to, we've always at least implemented one thing. I think I made the mistake the first time and tried to come back and do 20 different things.
Yeah.
And it was just a it was just a bad situation. It didn't work out. I was about to say shitstorm.
Well,
So,
you can cause chaos as a leader
yeah.
if you try and do that. Yes.
Yeah, so it was, so anyway, I would recommend when you come back, focus on one or two things and just, do those things really well. And then, the next one you go to, do it again and again and again. But this one for me, and I shared it Sunday night with Cheplak and our elite group, that I really want to see Palms. We really want to have a woman in leadership. Some of the stories the women shared, and the things they do in leadership, and I think it's just a good position for us to fill in the future.
I agree with that. One of the panels, and we'll get into the speakers in a little bit. One of the panels they had was a women in leadership panel. And initially, we're an all male leadership team right now, right? And initially, you're sitting there, you're like, well, is you know what I mean? Women in leadership. I don't know if I can relate to this. So I sat there, you know what I mean, and listened and took notes. And it was funny. A lot of the topics they talked about resonated with me quite a bit as a spouse, as a stepfather, you know what I mean, as a friend, right? Or just being a supporting role in the office as a leader. It was very interesting. And I think for us, especially, we're not exposed to that type of leadership day in and day out in our office, right? And I think I agree with you. I think that was that discussion was one of the better panels for me personally, and some of the things I took away from that.
Yeah, I mean, just the empathy, the things they struggle with, right? Being super successful women, and dealing with, having children, and
Mhm.
you know, f- feeling bad being away from children and working, and all the things that go along with that. I mean, they got super vulnerable as well. And some of the questions that were asked were like, well, how could I be a better father
Yes.
to my daughter so she could maybe one day become an amazing woman like some of the women up there in that panel. So it was definitely impactful. And like I said, that was one of the things that I realized, that there's some things that we can't do as men, and I
Right.
think it's very important to have women in leadership. And that's something that I think we are going to move towards. And find the right person that'll fit.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, one of the things I do want to jump into, Preston, was one of the things, and I heard John say this. He kind of spoke between the speakers, and I heard John say this, and it kind of resonated with me throughout the 2 days. And it's success leaves clues. And one of the things I started going back through my notebook of taking notes, and I shared it with you was, some of the messages kind of overlapped a little bit, and I mean this in a good way, where a lot of the speakers had some of the things in common that made them successful.
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot, and a lot of it's consistency, but you definitely see there's a lot of similarities. And what's interesting too is that me going to so many of the events, so many of those leaders at some point have shared challenges, and a lot of those challenges are similar.
Mhm.
Whether it's personal challenges or business challenges. Sometimes you see people up there and they're, you know, 500 million, 600 million, whatever they are producer wise. And you're like, oh, they, have the world in their hands and
Right.
everything. They deal with the same problems you deal with at 20 million, 10 million, all the way up. So that's, definitely something you see is, and with consistency. I mean, even John said it after he kind of, after the event, he reflected back and he shared this Sunday night that 5 years ago, there was 19 people in that room.
Mhm.
5 years ago, it was 19 people in that room, and he always had the vision to get to about 30, 40 people, and he's like, "Don't limit yourself," but, that's what he thought he wanted, and he said, well, once the everything he was doing got out there and more people became interested, I mean, there was 159 people in that room.
Go back to the beginning of what we spoke about vulnerability, opening up, telling your story. I think John, that's one of his appealing factors to people, is that he does that. He's kind of an open playbook of, this is where I came from, this is who I am, and this is where I'm going. And I feel like it resonates with people and they have a ton of respect, and he attracts especially a lot of successful people like yourself because of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, even our calls, I'd say probably 60% of our calls aren't even on real estate.
Yeah.
And I think he's like that with a majority of everybody. I mean, what he shares to read. I mean, Fear Hunters, which is not a real estate book.
No.
Heart of the Soul, not a real estate book. Motivation Manifesto, not a real estate book. Shadow Effect. So all these books that are, and things he teaches are more about bettering yourself, which then, you become a better leader, you
Mhm.
become a better business professional, you become a better real estate professional. So that's, yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that, people think of this event as just real estate. And although it's a lot of real estate, there's a lot of things that you could pull from it that you could take into any business,
Yeah.
personal or professional.
Yeah, I mean, you can even add spouse, husband, wife, um, parent to that list as well,
Oh, yeah.
and a conference and some of the stuff he shares. I want to break down some of the topics that were discussed. Like I said, success leaves clues. A lot of the speakers kind of overlapped on some of these topics. But number one that stuck out to me, the fact that people were there. A lot of people from the East Coast travel all the way halfway across the country to get there and paid a good paid a pretty good price just to seek learning and educate themselves. So that's number one I put on my list, Preston. That was like a message I heard over and over again, is continue to educate yourself. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. I mean, and you think about the expense. I mean, you had people like we brought our whole leadership team,
Mhm.
very expensive. But then we weren't the only one. Like that, you looked around that room and a lot of people that came, a majority of them brought their spouse or brought different people in their leadership. And, the reason why I think it's important to do that, like it's the same reason I sent Josh and Nick last year. I was like, y'all have to go. You have to go because you can't get that in Myrtle Beach. Like
Yeah.
there's not a group and you say most people need to see it to believe it.
Right.
And them getting in the room and seeing what others have achieved, then they're able to see what's possible.
Yeah. And I think, let's say you're an agent starting out listening to this, because our podcast hits a ranged audience of where you're at in your business. You're like, hey, I can't afford to go to a conference in Lake Tahoe. Invest $15 a month in Amazon Audible, where you can listen to audiobooks in your car. Some of these books we reference, or some of the books you hear about that are going to help you educate and move your business forward. I mean, think about the amount of time you spend in your car, right? By yourself, especially. You could turn that into a mobile classroom.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was so I use Whoop, and it sends you a report
Yeah.
at the end of each month. And last month I worked out and ran 37 hours.
Yeah.
So I listened to 3 audiobooks, and the one I'm listening to now is Limitless. And what I've noticed, like running and listening to an audiobook, or working out and listening to an audiobook, I remember so much more.
Yeah,
Like
you absorb it.
I could sit here and recite stuff in Limitless. And Limitless is by Jim Quick, which is, about speed reading, about ways to learn better. It's about ways to, take better notes and things like that. And I'm
Mhm.
actually going to have my kids read it next. My 12 and 13-year-old, my 9-year-old is a little bit young for that. But because you think about it, like in his book, he talks about learning and educating and speed reading, and he's like, when you look at education or look at the learning system, school system, you are taught how to learn and how to study the way that's been taught for hundreds of years.
Right.
Like what's the way to learn spelling words? Almost write the same word 20 times. And it teaches you how to learn it, and then you forget it like 30 minutes later.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, it's interesting the way some of the things he did, and it's actually made me think about it, although it has nothing to do with real estate. It's like taking the way that you could learn and moving it in a way where you remember everything. So it's actually made me think about, ways we could rewrite our agent excellence program to where people will actually learn it better because they associate it with certain things. But that's a great book.
Yeah. I mean, definitely reading, listening to audio books is, in my opinion, the number one thing any person can do to self-educate, and it doesn't cost a lot. And you're basically taking time by yourself that you'd be listening to music or scrolling on your phone or doing something that's not as productive and turning it into productive time. I think the other part of that is just surround yourself with the right people. Look around the company you're at, and are the people that I'm around, are they learning based? Does the company offer training that I can attend? Is there a platform I can log into and learn stuff that I'm struggling with, or am I just staying the same?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, you hear it all the time. You surround yourself with the right people, you'll
Mhm.
go in the right direction. You surround yourself with the wrong people, you're going to go in the wrong direction. So it's definitely, and that could be in business life as well. And I
Yeah.
shared that on stage too. Like I hear so many people talk about leadership, and, they don't get along with people at work, or they hire people. And, surround yourself with the people you want to be around,
Yeah.
especially with leadership. If you have the wrong leaders on your team, then that's probably not going to go in the right direction.
Yeah. The other thing that jumped out to me, and I want to break this down from two perspectives. Obviously, they were talking from a broker owner perspective, but it just resonates with an agent as well. Is highly successful people in the real estate business, they prospect and or recruit or have a system in place to do so every single day. Every single day. So talk about that a little bit, Preston. From a broker owner perspective, I'll break down the agent perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at teams. I can think of teams locally that have been super successful in the down market and an up market. And the one glaring thing that stands out to me is they prospect.
Every day.
They prospect every day, and not only do they prospect every day, but they leadership is in the room with them prospecting at the same time.
Mhm.
So, they're going to battle with them every single day, trying to get better, because when the leadership team or somebody in the leadership team is doing that, you're going to have people more willing to show up and do it as well. And, what's the best way to get somebody to do what you want to do? Your kids will do what they see and not
Yes.
what you tell them. Same thing with your team. If you want to grow your team, and, prospecting is definitely something that's important. It doesn't, other than making phone calls, it doesn't cost money. The systems cost money, but you're not paying for leads.
Yeah.
You're paying for the system, you're pulling addresses, pulling phone numbers, and you're dialing it. So, when you think about it that way, your ROI is, when you're getting leads for pretty much free. Well, the system costs money, but it's not as much as, say, like buying leads.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that in any market throughout history has been successful.
Yeah. And the key point that you said I want to point out is for a team leader, broker owner, the people you lead will imitate what you act on. Right.
Yep.
So if you come in the office every day at 8 o'clock and you're there sharp, treating this like it's a job and doing that to start your day and get the day going, guess what? The people you lead will do the same thing, right? If you come strolling in at 10:30, 11 o'clock,
Yeah.
right? Acting like this is a hobby for you, guess what? The people who work for you are going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So the people you lead are going to imitate you. The other thing with that, highly successful people have this on their calendar. They treat it like an appointment. Every agent I've ever worked with that's highly successful, they schedule their prospecting. Just like they'd schedule showing Mrs. Jones a house at 2 o'clock on Thursday, they have in their calendar prospecting to find Mrs. Jones
Yeah.
on their calendar at 8:30 on Wednesday, right? So you got to treat that as just as important, just as an important an appointment as showing that house.
Yeah, and you got to schedule your personal life as well, like your
Yes.
kid's football game or whatever. That needs to be in your calendar because those are things that you have to attend. For me, I have to attend those because it's something that I told myself no matter what I'm doing in work and business, I'm going to make sure I attend my kids, recitals, theater, and games. So it's definitely something that, like I said, the calendar, but also schedule the stuff that's non-negotiable in your personal life.
I had a coach, Preston, a coach mentor who told me one time, and I believe this to be true. I've never seen it not true. He told me all problems that realtors have in their business, all problems root back to prospecting and or schedule.
Yep.
Prospecting and scheduling. All problems you have in your business, whatever it is, it goes back to those two things.
Yep.
All right. So the next thing highly successful people did, and they talked about this over and over again, is track key performance indicators, KPIs, or some sort of important numbers in their business on a weekly basis. Preston, break that down a little bit.
So for us, we run EOS, which it has those, right? It has those
Mm-hmm.
with the things we follow each week. And for us, it's the amount of contracts, the pending, um, sales, phone calls, and all those things. So when you're thinking of it an agent perspective, what are the things that if I do these, I know I'm gonna be successful.
Right.
Like if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, what do I need to do to be successful?" And I'll tell them, I'll say, if you make 100 calls,
Mhm.
or say you want to do 10 contacts a day, which is a lot, or say 5 contacts, whatever it is.
Right.
If you do 10 contacts a day, every day, and speak to 10 people about real estate, whether it's through phone calls, through conversations, or whatever, it's very, very hard to believe that they're not going to be successful if
Yeah.
they continue that schedule. Because, 10 conversations is probably about 100 phone calls,
Hmm.
but then outside of, the phone calls, speaking to people throughout the day and just asking for the business. But, keeping up with phone calls, emails, text messages, and then obviously also when you think of prospecting, a lot of times people just think of dialing new numbers.
Hmm.
Part of your prospecting, which really isn't prospecting, but I would book it in prospecting as well, is following up with past clients. And if you don't have past clients, follow up with SOI, follow up with that restaurant manager you used to work for, follow up with, maybe a past teacher or somebody you had a really good relationship with. Because most people want to see somebody become successful that they care about.
Yeah.
If they don't want to see you successful, then you got to question if they really care about you. But most people are going to do anything they can, especially when it's somebody younger. They're going to help them however they can to become successful. So, I mean, I would make that part of your routine. And for me, I mean, continue, like you said, continue to stay educated, continue to grow. But if you just focus on that prospecting piece and getting better with role playing and working on scripts, and scripts doesn't mean you have to say word for word. It's just you're practicing sales and you're practicing how to respond to when people, because a lot of times people come back with the same thing. I'm just
Mhm.
looking, have a realtor,
Yeah.
have a family member that's a real estate agent, or, we're waiting for the market to crash. I mean, the responses, there's probably 8 times out of 10, they're one of those few.
Right.
So that's definitely from an agent perspective. That's definitely something getting in the business I would focus on.
And that goes back to education, right? Like what's in your toolbox to overcome that uh perspective objection. But a couple things that I want to point out that you said from a broker owner leader perspective. I think one thing we do with EOS that's really good, and it was mentioned at the conference, was everybody on your team should have a number that they own,
Yep.
right? Like, so for us, we do our weekly meeting today. Everybody has some sort of KPI that they come to the meeting that they have to report and speak on it. They have some ownership of. If you're a new agent starting out and you're like, well, this is way over my head. I'm just a one-man band here. I'll give you a really easy one. Contacts per day,
Yeah.
right? Track how many people you talk to per day. And I'll give you a really easy way. There's a formula to figure out how many people you talk to a day. It's like a rough, if I was helping you build a business plan, it's a really quick formula you can drill today. Take the amount of closings you want to have. Let's say, Preston, you want to have 20 closings, right? You times that by 50, and then divide it by the amount of working weeks in a year. So let's say 20, 1,000 divided by 48 working weeks. That's how many people you need to talk to a week. And then you break that down to how many people do I need to talk to per day. Now, when I say talk to, that's conversations. That's not just someone, that's not dial attempts. That's like verbal, like you had a conversation with somebody. So let's say that breaks down to 3 to 5 per day or 5 per day. You got to make probably 50 calls to talk to those 5 people, right? But like once you've reached that KPI for you in that day, you can say to yourself, hey, I had a successful day. Now, will those 5 people all be buying real estate today? Maybe, probably not, right? Maybe none of them will, but in the future they may. But there's a compound effect to having those good 5 conversations every single day in your business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So
Sure.
50 times 1 divided, let's say you work 48 weeks a year, right? You take off Christmas, take a couple vacations, 50 times every closing, divide that by 48 working weeks, and give yourself a KPI to work towards. Those are not call attempts. Those are actual conversations. All right, next one. I thought this was a pretty interesting one. Is Jeremy Larson was the first speaker there, and I thought he did a really good job talking about building relationships and having a budget of time and money to do so. He talked about having events as a broker owner or a leader. I want to break this down from an agent perspective as well, but talk about your thoughts on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done any events yet. We actually just talked about it before this podcast. We're actually going to do one in the spring, and for that is to bring people, in that we go see, right?
Mhm.
Like maybe people in our market, like you talked about, cannot afford to spend, the $2,500 for ticket, the flights, the hotel, and all that, but they can afford $300, ticket.
Mhm.
So, that's something we're going to do next year. We're going to have an event. And it's not, I mean, it's going to be just an event for whether it's, competing brokers can come to, their agents can come to. I mean, it doesn't matter. We're going to have an event next year in the spring that we're going to bring a lot of those speakers in. And for me, is to just educate people and to show people what's possible.
Mhm.
So I think that's definitely something that we're going to start doing more of, is doing events like that. Maybe it's 1 a year or 2 a year, but I think it's very important.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I mean, locally here, we haven't ever really had a big realtor event. I mean, our local board does a good job with seasonal events, and they bring in some speakers time to time. But I'm excited about the potential of having something like that here in Myrtle Beach. If you're an agent listening to this, you're like, again, a little over my head for my business. I'm a one-man band. I like to give you this perspective as well. This is where you look at your past clients. Those are the best relationships you have in your business because they're people who know what a working relationship with you is like. They've experienced it. Have a past client event. Even if you have 10 or 20 or 30, have a holiday party, have a tailgating event at a college football or high school football game near you. Have something where you bring all those people together and celebrate them and appreciate them for their business. Another good one is to plan pop by events, where I think a good one, Halloween coming up, you deliver flashlights for the kids with, something attached to it, like straight from I used to teach the Brian Buffini program,
Yeah.
right? Straight from something like that, where you're face to face, just kind of investing time and money in building relationships with people, because those are the people that they are your advocates that are going to buy another house someday and or refer you to somebody who is about to.
Yeah. And I like the, what we talked about earlier, pop by with pot pie.
Yeah, when I when I said pop by, Preston thought I said pop pies, and then we got into a dialogue about Popeyes and how good they are, and I said, "Why don't we do a pop by with a pop pie?"
Yeah.
That could be if somebody tries that, please let us know. That could be a good one. Um, One that really resonated with me, and I heard it over your talk especially, was great, and we talked about that. But another guy who really stuck out to me, I'd love to have him as a guest someday, was Matt Smith. He talked all about having the right mindset. He talked about, and he said this quote, and it's like resonated with me since. I remember even having a conversation with my wife about it afterwards. Is life happens for me, not to me. Just that whole mindset approach, just I think just in general will make 9 out of 10 people really successful in life. Just having that mindset of life happens for me, not to me. Talk about your thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, he had a great story, just his, his past, where he came from and, what he's achieved, but that definitely, having that mindset of like, things happen to everybody,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
It's how you react and, just really for me, things happen have happened all the time and just continue moving forward. I mean,
yeah,
you have to understand that that's part of life and, everybody has their challenges, but you just got to get up and move forward. And it's going to happen no matter how successful you are. Things happen and just continue to move forward and believe and you'll be successful.
yeah. One of the things Matt said that really resonated with me, and I'll share my own experience from it as well. But Matt Smith grew up without a father in his life, and he talked about a number of things that in his life challenges he had, but that was one of them. And he said, "I am the dad I am today because that happened for me, not to me. Like I'm a great father because I grew up without one."
Yeah, for
Right.
sure.
I think about that. I talked to my wife about it afterwards. I said, I've been divorced. I've been through an unsuccessful marriage. I think I'm the husband I am today because of that,
Oh
because
yeah.
I went through that.
Same thing when I talk about going to all my children's games. I mean, one of the biggest things I remember as a kid is, my mom worked 2, 3 jobs and she was always at my games and always made practice. And thinking about it now, I'm like, how did she do that? But my dad was never there, and that was
Mhm.
part of the reason why. And his was working or whatever, but that's part of the reason why I say that's the way that's why I'm gonna be at all the games. That's why I schedule the games. That's why I'm at every, golf match, unless I'm out of town, but I'm always there and I'm always gonna be there because that's, that's a big thing I remember of my childhood. And I want my kids to look back and remember, hey, my parents were always there.
Yeah, and that's from the personal perspective, and then from a business perspective, I talked to a lot of agents that went through the big recession, '07, '08. And a lot of those agents are the top producers in our marketplace because they went through that, because that happened for them, right? They had to learn to prospect every day and be prospect different. And I think about today's market, not that it's anywhere near that type of market, but it's more challenging than it was 6 months ago. We talk to agents all the time about that, right? People aren't just calling you up ready to buy a house like it
Yeah.
was 6 months or a year ago. You have to be a little more skilled to make that happen. But this is the type of market that's going to build really good agents. So if you're an agent listening, this market is either happening for you or happening to you. It's your mindset and how you let that play out.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a great talk. Hopefully someday we can get Matt on the show because I thought he was just seemed like a cool guy. This cool, good energy. So if you're listening to this at all, Matt, we'd love to have you as a guest. Um, Another one that was touched on quite a bit. You mentioned it in your talk and was touched on quite a bit was from a leadership perspective. I think if you're a team leader, broker owner, this should really stick out to you. And it's the term protecting your environment, right? And that comes from number one, hiring the right people, hiring or prospecting the right agents, or hiring the right people for your team. And then making a decision on sometimes when you don't have the right people in your environment.
Yeah, and your environment will, if you have the wrong people, a lot of times those people will leave on their own, right?
Yeah.
So if you run in an environment where it's consistent and you continue to do those things and you require those things, the people that don't fit typically leave.
Yes.
So when they don't leave is when you bend, right? But when you come up with ideas, you come up with criteria that they have to meet for, prospecting or whatever it may be. You just have to stay consistent. And if you stay consistent, then most, the people that don't belong will leave. And if you don't stay consistent, then just everybody, the people that are there and were consistent start seeing you bend. And there's,
Right.
it's just, you're going to push people out, but the right people will stay, and just continue recruiting and continue bringing in, especially when you're trying to build a team and build a company. I mean, there's no other way through prospecting and recruiting. Those are your two things.
Yeah.
Declining market, you're going to see less sales per agent. So how do you fight against that? For me, what I always go to, and what John preaches, is recruiting, right? So, and I told Josh and Nick this back in April, May. I was like, we have to continue recruiting, because the only way we're going to beat a declining market is have more agents. Agents will not become, I mean, some agents will sell more, but a majority of them will sell less.
Yeah.
So the only way to fight off a declining market is bringing on more agents, and
Right.
and obviously prospecting as well.
And when you bring on more agents, you're going to have to also protect your environment a little more.
Yep.
Two thoughts I have around that. Number one, from the protecting your environment standpoint, the way I approach it, and I was having this conversation with someone in our leadership team this morning, is you have to stand firm on policies, procedures, and of course your values, right? Like your core values as a person in a company. You stand firm on that. That doesn't mean you can't be like soft. And when I say the word soft, I mean caring in terms of how you approach people, right? Like, I'm going to care about what you have going on. You know what I mean? We're going to empathize with you, but these are things I can't be flexible on.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when you say sometimes people will weed themselves out, it's because you're not willing to be flexible on those things. Right. And that's where you have to be consistent. And what you talked about, recruiting, right, fixes a lot of things in a broker owner's business, right? Especially when the market downturns. Again, I like to flip this over to the agent who's listening to this and say, well, I'm not a broker owner. Prospect.
Yeah.
You want to, your business is down. You got to talk to more
Talk
people.
to more people.
You
Yeah.
got to talk to more
Same
people.
thing. Yeah.
I was having this conversation with an agent last week who was like, hey, you know what? My sales are a little bit off. They're this, they're that. And I was like, yeah, the market's different. You were an order taker.
Yeah.
6 months ago, people literally would call you out of your database and say, hey, we want to see this house. We want to put an offer on. We would get a handoff from an ISA where it was like, yeah, these people are ready to make an offer. That's not happening yet. Number one, you got to be a little more skilled when you talk to people. But number two, you got to talk to more people. If you want your business not to be impacted, you got to talk to more people. It's the same thing. The next thing I thought was interesting that a lot of people had in common, a lot of successful people. This goes back, I guess, from a conference perspective, but I think it goes back to a learning perspective, is to take action and to implement in their business with urgency, right? What are your thoughts on that a little bit when I say that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, especially when you leave these conferences, right? Or whether you're an agent going to something, you hear, maybe it's prospecting or a follow-up program or whatever. It's better to do it sooner, because a lot of times if I'll put it off to next week, what ends up happening?
You don't do
put it off next week,
Yeah.
the following week. So really it's good. A lot of times when I leave these conferences, I'll write down the things, okay, I want to talk, like I have things I want to talk about today in our meeting. It's good to go ahead and get those things implemented as soon as possible. You could tweak them as they need be, but if they work, don't tweak them, implement them, follow through with them, and just stay consistent and do it sooner rather than later, because there's always, if you put it off to next week, it usually ends up not happening. And that's the biggest thing I talked about briefly in Tahoe as well. I want to talk about it more, but when you get up there on stage, you're nervous, you get off, you're like, oh man, I forgot to talk about this.
Yeah.
But it's just, doing those things. And also, how many people go to a conference and they write down tons of notes and leave the conference excited? They get back and 90% of them don't do anything.
Right. You're 100% right.
It's, implement it, come back and put it in place. And if it fails, or, you misstep on it, just continue moving forward. That's really something that, and Kelly Salter talked about it as well, about how she was, doing video and was in the airport doing the video, so was doing things like that. So when you're thinking about an agent perspective, like what you're talking about, all these things as a broker, well, no, video works.
Yep.
Video, text message work. All these things work. Implement them in your business. And like with the video text, where people are like, I don't like how I sound on camera. You sound exactly the way you do on camera as you do in person.
Yeah.
So just, rip off a video text and, send it, video it one time, send it. If you messed up, who cares? Right? We're all human. I mean, and it's super fast. Like something like video text could take 30 seconds and
Mhm.
it's sent. You recording it 5 or 6 or 10 different times, a lot of times they get worse
Yes.
as you continue on because your anxiety just continues to build and build. And you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, screw it. I'm not sending anything.
Yeah.
So just shoot it one time, send it, and be done.
Um, Last thing I want to touch on, which I thought was interesting from a leadership perspective that was spoken about, and it made me kind of analyze what we do as a company a little more. And you and I have talked about this some, is teaching and expecting resourcefulness from your team members, right? And this goes back to onboarding. This is, and I never really related the two, Preston. This was a good takeaway for me. That's the point of onboarding. Like when you onboard a new employee or onboard a new agent to your team or your company, the point of that onboarding process is to teach them where to find the resources that they need to solve a problem or be successful. Like you're teaching them where the resources are so they can be resourceful for themselves, right? Um, of course, we have a platform that they can do that on their own. It's called Trainual, but then we do offer training. But the point of onboarding is getting plugged into all those systems so that they can then be resourceful for themselves. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely you think about a time standpoint as well. Like if you don't have the resources for them to go to and you're answering every single question as your company's growing, imagine,
Got a
okay,
minute?
you have 10 agents right now. What happens when you have 110 agents?
Yes.
So it's good to, and we have Trainual, but there's more things that we need to do.
Yeah.
Um, that we are going to do. We're hiring somebody for onboarding that's starting next week because we realized we needed somebody to
Mhm.
own that onboarding as we're bringing on 10 new agents a month, 12 new agents, 8, whatever the number is. That's a lot of people to get through the door, and that's a lot of people to get through the door and make it smooth and consistent,
Yep.
right? So you're onboarding people on the way your business runs, where to find things. And if that onboarding system and process is a mess, most likely their next couple of months are a mess. So it's definitely good to have that consistency and them understand where to get all those things from.
Yeah. If you don't have that, you are the got a minute guy or
Yeah.
the got a minute lady. Where you're gonna have the agent at your door. Hey, you got a minute? Times that if you have 10 agents right now, times that by 7 when you have 70,
Yeah,
right?
it's a lot easier to say, "Hey, you got a minute?" And they ask the question, you say, "Remember when we went over that is in the library, just go in there and find it?"
Yep.
It's a lot easier to do that than to answer every question. And eventually they won't come to you. They'll be like, "Oh, I just go into the library and find it." And if it's something I can't find, then that's a different story. But if it's in there, you're going to have those 10 or 20 questions that don't come to you anymore.
Mhm.
You got to teach people how you want them to ask questions or how you want them not to ask questions, right? So you got to teach them how to go to the library and to search that. Because if you continue to answer all the questions, just like my kids are with hey Alexa, what's this? I'm like, freaking, pick up a book and figure it out and
Yeah.
look it up. So it's you don't want to be Alexa.
Systems are a form of leverage in your business,
Yeah,
right? So an onboarding system is a form of leverage, and the point of leverage is to save you time, right? And with time, you can make more money, right? It's all related. So think about that onboarding system. If you don't have that system for your team, for your company, if you don't have a system in place where somebody comes in and I'm going to show them how to be resourceful, you're the resource,
yep,
right? So you have to, that's how serious. And it's funny, I always knew the importance of onboarding from a retention standpoint, but I never thought about it from a time standpoint as a leader. And, as this company's grown, I've personally experienced it, as we've grown and grown and grown, where now it's like, well, why do we have so many got a minute? Well, it's because we need to fix something on that front end when they walk through the door.
that's right.
Right. And as a company, I can tell you that's something we are always fine tuning, always tweaking. What can we do to make it better? As Preston said, we have a person starting next week who's going to have ownership over that process. Right. Not that they're going to be the got a minute person, but they're going to be the, hey, let me help you be a resourceful person on your first couple months here.
That's right.
And I think that's so important.
You know what we didn't talk about?
What didn't we talk about?
Marathon.
That is coming up. What we got, about 12 days
12 days.
to the half marathon. How you feeling, man?
Good, man. I did 12 miles on Sunday. Felt like things were falling apart, but I made 12 miles.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. This
Yeah.
is this is for me personally, and I've been a competitive runner for a few years now. This is the most strategic I've ever gone into a race, like with a plan of what I'm doing. Um, so
Surrounding yourself with the right people.
surrounding myself with the right, yeah, you guys have inspired that in me. So yeah, I mean, I ran my last long run on Saturday. I did after the hurricane. Actually, it was beautiful out that morning. I did 13 miles with negative splits. You know what that is, Preston?
Yes.
So you run faster pace as you
Run
go.
faster as you
Yep.
go towards the end.
Yep. So I felt good about that. And now I'm on what they call the taper, where I'm just running short runs right up until. So I've never done that before. I've always gone kind of like I'm kind of a like all in type personality. So I've always gone like full tilt right up to like whatever the
Yes.
race is.
I started, so I didn't run this morning because it was cold. That
Yeah.
was bad excuse. But I actually lifted weights this morning.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna run tonight, then I'm gonna run tomorrow. But yeah, I'm gonna run 3 or 4 miles tonight and then 6 miles tomorrow. And then, slowly, I think next week I'll run 12 or 15, 12
Like total.
before the race.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I have a bunch of short kind of every other day is a short day.
Yeah, so I'll run and do my last run next week on Friday or Thursday or Friday. Which one?
I'll do
Coach.
I'll do like a 4 or 5 mile on Friday before the race is on Sunday.
Yeah.
And then Saturday, I like to do a little like just 2 miles, which doesn't sound like much. I call it a little shakeout.
Mhm.
You're not sprinting, you're not running hard. You're just an easy pace for 2 miles to kind of shake everything out. If you got new shoes for the race, you wear those, make sure they're broken in, that kind of thing. I like to do that the day before.
Yeah, I bought shoes about a month ago, so they're still good.
Good. All right, guys. Well, that's all we got for you today. I hope you guys have a great day, a great rest of your week, and we will, of course, talk to you soon.
See ya.